Thank you to my channel members and Ko-fi supporters that make these videos possible. You can also support me by buying a deck tech on my weekly Tuesday and Sunday streams. More info in the video description. Hello everyone! I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, under a different lens of categorizing commanders into different phenotypes and then telling you how to best support them. That being said, it's kind of impossible to do this. Any given commander can serve so many different roles in a deck, and well, there's just a few thousand of them to talk about. So instead of doing that, I want to offer more general advice to remedy a problem that I've seen plaguing a few of the deck review submissions I get on stream. That being the issue of poorly protected commanders. In this video, my litmus test of choice will be Lightning Greaves, since your use of this game object is often the thing that tells me the most about how well your deck is built. Though, feel free to replace it in your mind with cards like Tyvar's Stand or Guardian Augmenteer. Now, not supporting your commander sometimes is actually a good thing. I know what some of your responses are going to be to that. The format is literally called Commander. Why would you not want to support the commander? The answer is simple, really. Some decks just don't really care about the command zone. This is very much true for a couple of my decks, mostly Kellen and Judith, where the commander is just a supporting piece to its 99 and not a linchpin to the game plan. Kellen is just a card advantage engine that also provides some support to one specific lock in the deck, and Judith is a sacrifice payoff, of which I run plenty in the 99. If either got pinned permanently under a Drannith Magistrate, I wouldn't particularly feel the pain. In fact, even if I could remove the Drannith Magistrate, I probably wouldn't care to if one or more of my opponents cared about their commander more than me. Anyway, the point being, in these decks, it's probably bad to support the commander too much for the simple reason that it will lower the card quality of the deck to include a huge protection suite of Lightning Greaves or Champion's Helms or what have you to protect the commander. Card quality is not often mentioned when it comes to talking about card advantage, but it's an incredibly important factor. In Judith or Kellen, where card flow can be limited, I can't waste a top deck on Lightning Greaves when I could be hitting a 3 mana value or lower creature for Kellen, or I could be hitting sack fodder for Judith. Both of these decks also just pack more synergistic protection packages than just a good old generic Lightning Greaves that support my whole deck rather than just my commander. In Judith, Living Death is a button that means I don't particularly care what happens to my monsters beyond a farewell, and if frankly that hits the stack, there's nothing those stupid boots could do anyway. And as for Kellen, I run a pretty huge protection package that is actually larger than it appears because of Court of Calling being able to grab Guardian of Faith or Selfless Spirit, and Gaddock Teague shutting down troublesome board wipes that would normally have a chance of blowing the deck out. If you pack a deck in that camp, I highly recommend cutting your Greaves for value or a more synergistic piece of protection. That is, unless you're actually using the Lightning Greaves for an alternative reason, and the protection is just a byproduct. Roxanne and Tekkathol are my decks that fall into this camp. Greave runners that don't need it for protection. For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern, where if she's nuked from orbit, she's still ramped half her commander attacks. So if you make your land drop, you can just redeploy her. In fact, I'll often throw her into free blocks just to be able to cast her again on my second main phase to get another Meteor, because the deck makes that much mana. That being said, Greaves is invaluable to the deck because of the haste it grants, allowing me to deploy Roxanne, get a Meteor, and then immediately swing with Roxanne, get a Meteor, which effectively speeds up all the deck's bullshit by a turn. Tekkathol is running slightly more protection than Roxanne is. He can make himself indestructible, but that word doesn't really mean much nowadays, so it's nice to have Shroud. This being said, the deck also runs a modest counter magic package, so I wouldn't be running Greaves if it only did this. Instead, the deck runs Greaves for haste on key combo cards like Thrumming Bird or Core Tapper, and it's also a cheap artifact that it can be sacrificed to reshape or improvise to a Whir of Invention. In the case of a card like Tyvar's Stand I mentioned before, ask yourself instead of the haste question, are you using it as a green fireball in an Expels Matter deck that packs some amount of cards that you also incidentally want to protect? Then it is a good include, but don't run it as a protection spell only. So then, besides decks that don't particularly care about the commander, where else have I seen Greaves where it doesn't necessarily belong? There's a few answers to this question. A recent example that comes to mind is a Kiora Sovereign of the Deep deck that was packing Greaves as a way to protect the commander. First things first, this commander's kind of mid. Get over yourself. If anyone is thirsting to remove Kiora, that's a slow game of Magic, which is where exactly this ramp-filled Stompy deck would thrive. Secondly, since most sea monsters are giant, you probably have an insane ramp package to get them out for Kiora, as mentioned before. So she's really easy to redeploy, even if she does get blown up. Third, a counterspell like Stubborn Denial will probably be better than the Greaves in the slot, since it'll handle board wipes, which seem much more deadly for this deck's game plan than targeted removal would ever be. And finally, if you've played against a Roaming Throne before, you know that Ward 2 might as well be hexproof. So Ward 3 here is basically super hexproof. This being said, the same argument isn't necessarily true for something like Voha. It seems to be the same on the surface, Ward 3 and the card is in green, but this dog really likes to have her haste. I could maybe see an argument for cutting it in some builds with the recent errata to all red creatures that gave them haste. Sorry, I mean with the recent printing of Arena of Glory. But I wouldn't fault anyone for not running it. That is not mentioning that the card is supremely good with the dorks, which this deck is sure to pack a lot of. Second up for decks that don't want the boots are the aforementioned Kellen and Judith Brews that don't particularly care if their commander got sealed in concrete and thrown into the Marianas Trench. And third are decks like Muldrotha that want to squeeze the game into a hyper late game value hell. In a Muldrotha deck, if she is blown up, that's just fine, really. Just keep doing your Sultai stuff from hand until you have enough mana to redeploy her, a land, and a game object, and pass. No one is holding a gun to your head, making you cast your commander the second you legally can in this type of deck, making Greaves rather irrelevant, since you can just wait until Muldrotha is card advantageous to deploy, instead of just jamming her on 6 mana and passing your turn. But you can replay the Greaves from the graveyard. Yes, I'm just saying that's not that good in a deck that has the sheer insane inevitability that Muldrotha does. Take the Greaves out of your Muldrotha deck, stop treating her as a 6-mana tap-out pass play, and you'll see for yourself how little you miss the boots after you loop a Spore Frog or two. Other cards like the Greaves that you might be running in Muldrotha that I recommend you cut are cards like Sereth the Viper's Fang or Guardian Augmenteer. She doesn't need the help, trust me. Now, all this bashing of Greaves and cards like it aren't universal. Greaves, when applied properly, can be a good Magic card. I'll now get to the rarest decks in the Greaves running family, the ones that actually want to run it for protection. I have one deck like this, Zurzoth. Now, alright, Zurzoth here uses the haste quite well since he's an attack trigger machine, but I legitimately think I would run Greaves in this deck even if it didn't grant haste for the simple reason, for one, the deck's function is entirely hinged on the commander remaining in play, and two, the deck is mono red, which has really bad options of protecting its boards besides kill everyone now, which to be fair, the deck does well, but Greaves provides some nice insurance to that plan, making the monster that will kill everyone in 2 turns impossible to touch outside of Rats. In other mono red decks, too, like Torbran or Ashling Flame Dancer, which will win the game easily if left alone, I think Greaves has a home. It's not for every red deck, though. For example, Burgi is a Storm deck that is probably just better deployed on 5 mana alongside a Ritual to start a combo off turn. In that game, hitting boots with an Impulse Draw that could have been more Impulse Draw or a Ritual is game-losingly bad. Also, other colors help shore up this weakness, even with a commander that would like to be protected. Valgavoth Harrower of Souls is a good example of this. Why run the boots when you can just run Reanimate, Animate Dead, or Bolt Bend since he has 4 power? There's way more options for protection in this deck than the previously listed ones. Not to mention, any targeted removal on Valgavoth immediately causes you to go up a card anyway because of the ward cost, making protecting him even more irrelevant since he's effectively a 2 for 0 if not answered during your turn. You draw a card, your opponent loses a removal spell, and your commander is just there to be recast anyway. Anyway, that's it for the video. Tell me, have you ever realized you're running too much protection? What decks have you considered cards for Lightning Greaves, Tyvar Stan, or Guardian Augmenter, but decided not to run them? Why? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, bye! For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern where if she is nuked from orbit, she have to ramp her own commander text. For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern where if she's nuked from orbit, she still For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern where if she's nuked from orbit, she still oh my god. For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern For Roxanne, she has a Golos play pattern where if she's nuked from orbit, she still oh my god.